Welcome back, everyone. Please take a seat, and we'll start with session 8, the last one in the series. And the theme of the session is labor and sustainability. Very important topics that need to be discussed in the context of Chinese firms overseas as well. Anyhow, we have 3 papers and 4 speakers. And Anita will be the discussant of the 3 papers. First off is Liang Chen, an ANU graduate in cultural anthropology from the University of Botswana these days, who will talk about Chinese firms in Africa, particularly in Ethiopia. Is that right? And Botswana as well. And after that, it's Pak Alfian and Camilla to talk about Indonesia again. And last but definitely not least is Monica, also talking about Indonesia. And those 2 presentations will cover 2 important export sectors in Indonesia, nickel production and palm oil production. Please.
Okay. So thank you again for Greg and Debbie for organizing this wonderful conference, and thank you for putting me in the last panel, because I can inspire a lot from previous presentations, and I revise a lot with my PPTs. So the topic here is about the industrial standards and the perception, the self-perception of Chinese during this African and China encounters. So this is a research question. It problematizes the industrial standards and technology transfer. And then the second question is if we focus on this industrial standards and technology transfer, what are the consequences? What are the spillover effect of the Chinese, the way Chinese perceive themselves in the African context? So why in industrial standards and technology transfer? I'm an anthropologist. Maybe people have stereotype of doing like magics or religions. But here is the quote from the anthropologist who study religions. He said we have to speak in our own, we have to choose to speak in our own conceptual language or speaking in theirs. Okay. So here is because my informants are basically like the production managers and engineers. So every day, at their everyday life, the dialogue is around the industrial standards and the technology, something like that. So have to speak in their own languages. And also, if you look at the definition for industrial standards by Ethiopian government, you can see that a standard is a document established by consensus, and there's order, something like that. It's all about languages. So we really have to into their world, using their own languages. And also because this matters to African countries. So African countries still, like many countries, they have experienced the industrialization since the 1960s after the independence, and then because of the structural adjustment in the 1980s, there was the kind of deindustrializations. But now there's some countries, they're in the process of industrialization. So this is one example case from Ethiopia. So you can see that focusing on industrial standards, really like engaging the ambitions of the African nationals and politicians and intellectuals. So here's a book about by the senior government official in Ethiopia government. The title is Made in Africa. So the ambitions is like before they have, made in USA or made in Japan or made in China. Now we should have this made in Africa. So why Ethiopia and Botswana? I actually, to be honest, I did not choose the field, but the field just come to me. So after graduation from ANU, I decided to do some African studies. Okay, so one of the factors is I have to choose a safe country. So Ethiopia at that time. Now everybody knows that there's civil war, but at that time we're quite safe. So I chose Ethiopia to do some studies. That's my story. And the second also is actually a master student that I supervised in the Chinese university. And he wanted to do some like African research relate to that. So because I have connections in Ethiopia, so I took him to Ethiopia like that. So and also why Botswana? Because I get a job in Botswana. You know, what's specified in the contract is I have to provide a service to the local communities. And what kind of services? A lot of translation work, you know, from the legal system, the court. They wanted to know what the Chinese are doing there. So they asked us to translate the document. And also, I had the honor to interpret at the High Court. Okay, but then the second reason is for comparison purposes. You know, because Africa is big. Africa has 52 or 54 countries, and each country is different. And so you can see that here's employment of industry, percent of total employment. So you can see here is Botswana. It's actually undergone like a deindustrialization after 2000. But Ethiopia is not very low, but they had the industrial taking off from 2005 to 2018. Okay, they remain like you know, annual growth, industrial growth of more than like 10%, and then now they have the civil war. And in terms of the technology transfer, there's the 4 models proposed by the renowned scholar Deborah Bottingen. She proposed that there are 4 channels. The first is modeling, and second is spillover. So if you work for a Chinese company, and then after that leave the company, you take the technology home and you start this business. And third is subcontracting, which I will discuss in the case of Botswana. And fourth, the presence of, you know, because of the stimulus of the foreign company, in this case it's the Chinese companies, so the local companies will compete, and they have their own, you know, design their own technologies. And there's a 5th one proposed by Anshan Li, the Chinese historian on the African or the African Chinese, the Chinese in Africa. So it's called technology cooperation, but actually it's one-sided. In most of the cases, it's you know, started from 1960s when there's still like, you know, a sentiment of a third world solidarity. So the case in point is the Tanzan Railway. So this picture is that I had a conference in the Zhejiang Normal University, and these are people who participate in the railway construction in the 1960s. And now is the time they look at, you know, 60 years ago when they were young and working with the, you know, the African counterparts. So, but, you know, the story was not successful because from another author, Snow at the time, what the Chinese did was that they just teach, you know, when they're working with the Africans, they teach without words because of the language barriers and also because of illiteracy of the African side. But they offered on-site job trainings through assemble or dismantle a piece of machineries. But Snow argued that, you know, the Chinese did not teach them the conceptual groundings. So when the Chinese left, you know, the Africans when there's a breakdown, they cannot fix machines. Okay, so these failures. But this is a very important lesson for the effective technology transfer. Okay, so and if you're focusing on the industrial standard, you find it's quite complex to, you know, in that African context. So one example is like, you know, one of the problem for me in Botswana, you have like different industrial standards. So it's caused a lot of trouble. You have the one from India and from the South Africa and the one from the UK. Okay, and this is the picture of my the residents. You can see the European ones. Really trouble. So but they do exist a different industrial standard. Okay, so so keep this in mind and that look at the cases. So the first case is the tenuous technology transfer in Ethiopia. So what happened is that you know, the Chinese and the Ethiopians, they form kind of you know, on the ground they form kind of what I call the power triangle among the clients, which is an Ethiopian bank endorsed by the Ethiopian state, and a constructor, which is a Chinese giant construction company, and the supervisor appointed by the client. Okay, they form this kind of power triangle. So this is I try to explain a bit to those who are not familiar with the construction industries. So why there's a client, why is a consultant, and why is the constructor. So what happened is that the client allowed the question is that because the Chinese giant company has built a lot of skyscrapers in the world, okay, but Ethiopians technologically speaking is a bit backward. So on what capacity can they supervise the Chinese constructors? Okay, so what they did is that the client allowed the project to be designed according to the Chinese standards, but at the same time, it must meet the minimum requirement of the European standard that they are familiar with. Okay, because many of the Ethiopians consultants, they have the study overseas in European countries, so they are familiar with that. So they pick that. They did not pick the US standards because US standards is very, very expensive. It considers a lot about safety, but the US people, the Americans do not care about money. Okay, they choose not to use that one. They choose to use the European one. So more interesting is that the European standard, the Ethiopian engineers were also renewing their national standard ESEN. So ES representing, maybe ESEN. So ES representing Ethiopia and EN representing European code. So actually it's a combination of the very outmoded industrial standard and some elements of the European standard. And with that, they became the supervisor. So what happened is that, Ethiopian made full use of their official capacity as a consultant in demanding the explanations of the Chinese industry standards from the Chinese engineering. So they asked the Chinese contractor to change design and then evaluate, thereby fleshing out the unfledged ESEN standard. Okay. So what happened is that because Chinese are very proud of the Chinese speed, because Ethiopians constantly ask them to stop the project and to learn from the Chinese, so they're not very happy. And there's a number of reasons behind this Chinese speed. Okay, so there's the war over time between the Chinese and the Ethiopians. So what the Chinese did is that sometimes they just delete the technological details in the drawings. So that's the Ethiopian supervisors will not supervise according to that drawings. And also the Guanxi practice in place. The Chinese trying to do a lot of favors for the Ethiopians. But it does not work. What happened is that the perception of the Ethiopians by the Chinese is stubborn. They can not negotiable. But this is exactly the Ethiopians have that agency. Okay, and then because Chinese are good at these connections, they expect the reciprocity by speeding up the process. But Ethiopians do not do that. So they think that they're not ethically good. So according to a model proposed by the FISC, if the people with low warmth and no competence is perceived by Chinese and is often associated with emotions of disgust and contempt, and which is the psychological basis for racialization. And this racialization from management has some spillovers over labor issues, which for the time being, I will not discuss that. Okay. And then the self-perception of Chinese is that they try to justify everything, and they try to remembering their past experience. So they compare the relations between nowadays China to Ethiopia to the relations between Japan and China in the 1990s. Okay, and they said that the Japanese, they complained that Japanese also they're very reluctant to transfer technology, just like squeezing the toothpaste. So for the time being, I should not discuss the second case. But the general idea is that Botswana has a totally different context. It's more liberal. It's more market oriented. But the problem with that, from that case, you can see that the case is actually between a Botswana client, a Botswana Railway, and a consultant, and a contractor Chinese company, and a local supplier. Okay, but the local supplier, they did not produce the goods according to the South African standards, but gradually they just are driven away from the standards, and a lot of factors, local factors in place. And argue that is it because some liberalizations or marketizations of taking place in Botswana, so they're kind of a brain drain from the previous Prasdata companies, so they were not able to, absorb, or taking the industrial standard seriously. But the market behaviors, they're very good as market players. So anyway, the conclusion. Is that the get back to the effective of TT is always in the case of Ethiopia, it's always 10 years and fraught with tensions. But there's the strong African agency, and that's from the Ethiopian state that behind the Ethiopian bank, that they can get the technology from the Chinese actors, whereas in the Botswana context, there's kind of a failure to do so. And also from these interactions, the Chinese, now they are positioning themselves above African citizens technologically, but identify with developed nations such as Japan and South Africa. Yeah. So thank you.
Well. Thank you. Alfian is going to talk about the Chinese nickel industrial park in Sulawesi in Indonesia.
Thank you very much. Thank you for Dr. Greg and Debbie for invitation. And before I start, short confession that I'm not coming from academic background, but I would love to discuss with all of you and get feedback. Our title of, me and Camilla, and I will present, and Camilla will involve in the discussion. Our title is Fragmented Solidarity of Indonesian and Chinese Workers in Chinese Nickel Industrial Park in Indonesia. Our research proposed to have a common paradigm of labor relation at many study sites of Chinese company overseas, because many of study look more on Chinese manager and local workers, but in Indonesia it's different. Chinese workers also work in the level of rank and file. They are driver, welder. So we want to look more on local workers and Chinese workers in the same site production line, and we want to do more comparative studies on this issue of local workers and Chinese workers encounter. And also we want to propose because many talk about the solidarity between Indonesian and Chinese workers, or Chinese workers and local workers, but what kind of solidarity and what kind of barrier that prevent solidarity in the work site. So we want to look more on this. And the method is more activist. I went there 3 times. The 2 field trip in 2018, where I lived for 3 weeks and interview semi-structured interview with workers, and the last one is the 3rd one in December last year with Camilla, and we also did interview with Chinese workers and Indonesian workers. In total, we interview 30 Indonesian workers and 10 Chinese workers. This is the outline, and then we start. So just brief background of Indonesia nickel bomb and new labor policy, because if we talk about nickel now, Indonesia is main spot of production, nickel production and electronic battery factory in the world now. So in China side, the impetus of investment in Indonesia come from state policy on reducing excess of steel capacity, transforming to a low carbon economy, and then push the Chinese investment to come to Indonesia to seek opportunity, and also to secure important national resources and strategic asset overseas, and demand for electronic vehicles. And also related to the presentation from Professor Pierre, that in China there are lack of profit, so they push investment outside to more profit investment. So, and from Indonesian side, it's also the incentive is to get economic value added, because the government and they say that we export nickel material, raw material, and then we lost billions of dollars. Now we have to have value added, and they passed the law on mining and coal mining to stop the export of nickel overseas. Should be processed in Indonesia. So this is the law that prevented export raw material, and then you have to have smelting processing. That's why China looks this as an opportunity to invest in the smelting and nickel, because the issue of this law. And also after the Chinese investment come, Indonesian issues some regulation on wages, job creation law, to actually to ease the investment in the nickel industry, issue the regulation of environmental issue, and then also issue the regulation of the use of foreign worker and low wages of Indonesian workers. So this is background, and IMIP is our study case study is Indonesia Morowali Industrial Park. Why we choose this is the first smelter of Chinese investment built in Indonesia, and they employ many of Chinese workers, rank and file. It's here, and all is Chinese smelter company investment, and they in total around 100,000 of Chinese worker rank and file, and then manager in the Sulawesi Island. This is the area where rich of nickel and smelting companies, mining company and smelting company. This is the area that rich of smelter, and then Chinese company. There are 10 of smelter here. Some still continue, some already operate. And this is the short background about IMIP, joint venture between Tsingsang Holding Group and Indonesian Bintang Delapan, and it's employ 81,000 workers, and around the ratio is 7:1 Indonesian and Chinese workers. And this is an industrial park, and there are 13 tenants or company there from China, most from China, and it has 31 is around 20 is smelter, and the rest is power plant, nickel, and logistic company. And IMIP is also later it's added in the list of BRI project, but when it's start building in 2013, it's not part of BRI. But it's part of national strategic project, which is under Jokowi government, that it's put more power on national government to can intervene local government if government want to build a national strategy project, national government, they can easily intervene local government. So IMIP also part of national strategy project and national strategic object, which is more highly securitized in terms of workplace. They deploy military, deploy police, and yeah, it's mostly stainless steel production and battery, EV battery, and 31 company. It's expanding. We hear it will. There will be more company until like 16 company there, but it's under still building. And we come to our discussion on we see a comparison between Chinese and Indonesian worker encounter in the workplace. First is hierarchy in the workplace. Indonesian and Chinese workers, Indonesian workers and mostly work in general worker and foreman. There are only few of Indonesian workers work until they can move until manager, but it's a small number. But Chinese workers all work in manager, supervisor, foreman, and general workers, and they have a different helmet to differentiate them. And Chinese workers have more power. Even though they have a yellow helmet, that's the general workers, the lower one, but they can give order to Indonesian worker. And then it causes tension because Indonesians say that we are same helmet. Why you give order? And then this is the recruiting process. Around the same age of Indonesian and Chinese worker working in the IMIP, and general workers and Chinese worker up more supervisor and manager, and mostly Indonesian worker work in production process. Same with Chinese, but Chinese worker predominantly in construction and subcontractor. In construction, and they employed by subcontractor. And this is working condition, salary. Chinese workers have more wages than Indonesian workers, but they have excessive overtime, no weekend, no holidays, and they are same in the working conditions, living in cramped rooms and dusty environment and frequent work injury. Every month we can hear the work injury die, but mostly blast, explosive in the area, and strict discipline. But strict discipline more on Chinese workers. If Indonesian workers, making a mistake, his Chinese supervisor will get more punishment. And this is extra control of Chinese workers, even though they work in the same workplace, but more control on Chinese workers. They cannot go outside, restrict to speech on social media. Some Chinese worker upgrade on working conditions, and then he get jailed by police, arrested by police. And they don't work with proper visa. They work with short visa, tourist visa, 2 months, and then will renew. And we see that it's like a workplace is like an enclave that it has own laws. It's not related to Indonesian law because in enclave, manager can do whatever they want, like not paying wages, confiscated passport, which is in Indonesian law, it's totally not allowed to do that for workers. And excessive control toward Chinese workers. And this is some of resistance that we see in the workplace, where Indonesian workers can have more channel and space to organize, to join the protest, to work with NGO, while Chinese workers, mostly they resistance individually. Not they cannot join the union. Sometimes they strike, but after only one day strike, and then after that there is no movement continue. But Indonesian worker more stable. They have union there. They can organize, and we see that also class consciousness of Chinese worker is low because related to the Chinese disempowerment of labor in China. When they work in Indonesia, they bring that class consciousness low. This is Indonesian workers strike in China in IMIP 2019, and but this is the biggest one. They still strike, but small. And this is a Chinese worker describing they strike in IMIP. Okay, so and we identify some of barrier and common ground in IMIP work site of Chinese and Indonesian workers: language and cultural difference, wage gap, and vary space of reproductions. Divide information to Indonesian workers and Chinese workers different, and sometimes can make them conflicting, fighting, and different mode of resistance. Vulnerability of Chinese worker, extra vulnerability, and lack of sustained collective power of Chinese workers. And the common ground is common labor and health problem, occupational and safety, which is the same experienced by Indonesian and Chinese workers, and they work in the same place. So there are some space we can utilize to organize them. I think. Thank you. Conclude. Thank you.
And the discussant of the three papers is Anita Chen.
The three papers are really interesting. I learned a lot from them, because, and it seems that after 2 days of discussion, we have finally come to the voices of the people. On the ground, what's happening down there with all these investments. Okay. I will go through each one of them, and then I want to make a broader generalization, if it is okay. Yeah. First of all, it is Chen Liang's paper. I really learned a lot because, well, I have the opportunity to read his paper, or an earlier version. I learned a lot because the paper contains a lot of details about technological transfer. It is something that I personally am very interested in because I'm interested in the labor process at the workplace. And this is really detailed, and it is very interesting. One thing I learned is one sentence that he has in his paper, which he didn't mention, and that is, we shouldn't think of Africa as starting from zero, which is true. I mean, generally, we see on TV all these problems in African countries, now Ethiopia in particular. Actually, they have their own standard because under the colonial period, they've already got some standard in technology transfer, which is, he calls it TT. And also the history of the Chinese coming in the 1960s during the Maoist period was very interesting. They came in as a kind of foreign aid, not commercialized. But now, Chinese companies are coming in as sort of profit-making institutions or bureaucratic institutions. So that is a very interesting thing. Technology transfer, it brings us to the idea of development, which applies to all three papers. Development issues. I don't know, I think that it comes back to Adam's presentation, which is also on development, of poor countries. They need the technology transfer, but in the case of Ethiopia and Botswana, there was already a kind of standard set up based on the European standards and also South Africa standards. And that is why the clients are the ones who can supervise. That is something we didn't discuss, that we talk about Chinese government supervising the SOEs. But here, it's supervised by the client. Now, that is interesting. And also not really transferring technology is an issue that doesn't just apply to this case. It applies to a lot of places, like in China itself. And when I visited Beijing JIP in the 1980s, 1980s, it was nothing. China really didn't have a motor industry. You go in and you went in and you think, God, this country was, they couldn't make a vehicle. But then we started opening up all these motor companies came in, and in 20-some years, China was producing the largest number of autos in the world. So the technology transfer is very important. I don't think they did it in this very detailed way as Chen Liang's paper described, but it was a process. Technology transfer is a process. And that is something that we should really look into. Okay. And as for Alfian and Camilla's paper, I think maybe you should change your title. Why? Because it was deceptive. I thought you were talking about solidarity among two types of workers, but it wasn't. They never had solidarity. It's not fragmented solidarity. They never had it. And that is what your paper describes, trying to describe that there is no solidarity, okay? And actually what your paper in the second half is that all the factors why they can't have solidarity, and you sort of mapped it out in your presentation, yeah. And there's racial elements and all that stuff. And what else? I have something else to say about this. One question I never got an answer. And that is, why does China allow or maybe the government encourages to export Chinese labor? Why? That is something interesting and not given an answer. And I can think of some reasons, but well, I'll let it go at that. Not the paper. Where is that? Okay. Let me see. Oh, yeah. Right. Because you emphasize that a lot of the ordinary workers are Chinese workers. Why is that? Why do they want to bring in Chinese workers? Why do the local government allow them to bring in ordinary Chinese workers, okay? Now, I suggest a solution to find out. I don't know, maybe there are other reasons. And one is you have a graph about work hours and pay. Try to turn it into payments per hour. See whether actually it comes down to Chinese workers are paid less than local workers. Try it. And also the trade union. The idea of a trade union is very important. It's, Indonesia now has been having free trade unions. And that is an important aspect in not excessively exploiting workers. We touched on trade unions today before. Yeah. And Monica, I learned something new because I haven't thought about it, but it brings me to the fact that whenever I go to buy something, you check the, whether it's sustainable and all that stuff. So it doesn't seem that it's working. That's it. And land grab is a big issue. I tried to look up land grab recently because of Cambodia. Cambodia's land grab is so serious that when you don't have a worker doesn't have a job, they go hungry, literally. I couldn't believe it. It was really serious because they have no land to support them, no land. And Chen Quan Li, the well-known Chinese labor scholar and sociologist, I remember many years ago she wrote about China, about migrant workers, and she said, they can go back to the land if they lose their job. Well, at that time, I wasn't aware of that. But now I'm becoming very much aware of Southeast Asian, the land grab problem. Okay, thank you.
I'll give the speakers an opportunity to respond to Anita's comments first before handing over to the audience.
Thank you so much for your comments. Yeah, I have to say that the histories in China and in Africa, I should highlight more. So just to show that both the China and the African countries are not starting from a blank paper. Yeah, but I feel it's a bit challenging, just to refer back to the 1960s. So here, how I deal with the matter of history is that, I think there's a lesson from the history of the 1960s. There was a failure of the technology transfer, and I should ask why. So technically, is it because only the procedures, like teaching without language, is provided, and there's no conceptual map? And if you look at the Ethiopian's case, there also the separation between the drawings and the face-on-face teachings. And if you look at the Botswana case, which I did not have time, really sorry for that, I'll elaborate on that. You can see that there's a liberalization or the marketization that underlying this technology transfer. Even in their legal framework, they did emphasize that through the marketization, they should have some technology transfer, but which they did not. Is it because everything is a buying and selling, and there's no in-house arrangement, or like they do not have the institutional arrangement that conducive to the the transfer of concepts or drawings and the face-to-face teachings. So that I'm going to use that to bring the histories into the present. And thank you for that. Yeah.
Alfian and Camilla.
Yep, thank you, Anita. I know you have been asking these questions for many times. Yeah, like why Chinese workers go overseas for those projects. In this case, in IMIP, the Indonesian government does allow Chinese workers to come over, but with under certain regulation. So it's only the workers who they see as having certain skills can be in Indonesia, and wherever they work, they need to be accompanied by Indonesian workers, so that there is this element of local workers learning something from the Chinese workers. And from the interviews I did, it seems there. I think the idea of technical transfer has its base. Like one of the workers said that because a lot of the equipment were also imported from China, especially those related to smelting, it's the Chinese electricians and also production workers that know how to operate those machines. Even though it's not absolute, there are also people who came from a different background than smelting. But they do have certain, like vocational school background or years of experience working in smelters back in China, and then they come. And also, as I shown in one of those like TikTok videos, like some Chinese workers also think they can individually impart certain skills and knowledge, even like something as welding to the Indonesian general workers. And also because of the way the different workers are recruited, we didn't expand this, but the Indonesian workers are recruited in what some people describe as a militarized way, which is there isn't much much requirement about what they can do, except maybe driving. But they're recruited and then arranged at different positions without specifically who do what, and then so it's kind of like starting from zero, and so I think the background setting is that Indonesian workers not much requirement, and then the recruitment of Chinese workers is you need to have this level of experience. Yeah, so I think that's how the two, that's how it's set up. Yeah, some may not. Right.
Good. Thank you. Monica, would you like to respond to Anita's
sure.
questions? Issues?
Yeah, thank you for raising the land grabbing part. And I think the thing about this project is that I wanted to learn a China story, but when I learned more about it, I realized that I have to understand the land issues in Indonesia and the industry specific issues. And it's really complex. The land issues, I think they have a very, very dark and long history dating back to the colonial era. And Indonesia is, I think I've read a very good book by Tanya, who is a superstar in this field, and she compared Indonesia to Thailand. And in Thailand, all these land are actually owned by smallholders, and she thinks that's a better way to organize. It's a much better way to organize this. But in Indonesia, it's owned by big plantations, and she argued that it was actually a way for the government to allow them to take advantage of local people, and the smallholders actually have lost a lot in the process. Some people become landless people, and they are never clear how their land rights were lost, because in the process it's very messy and intransparent, and then people maybe and many times it's oral, like you give this land to me for 10 years and it's not kept in record, so maybe and after 10 years it's not he himself, it's his son or somebody else, and claiming, oh, this land is mine, but the company or the government says, no, it's not yours, it's the company's asset. And the companies are in turn also they make money not only for themselves but also for the government, and the government and many other people also take. I think Tanya argues that this is a cash cow for many different groups of people, and so it's a very complex situation, and I think the Chinese company, was not really prepared for all the complexities when entering the field. And then when they entered, they thought that they got all the land rights clear, it's in record. And when they entered the field, and people said, no, this land is mine. And there are many conflicts and tension there, and they have to do a lot of negotiation. And in this case of West Kalimantan, I think what is interesting is that there is a very strong local culture about fencing, the fencing culture, that whenever they are unhappy, they're really unhappy, they just fence the roads and say, oh no, you cannot use this road, and this have actually turned to be quite effective in this case, because Julong is from outside, and okay, the road is fenced off and they cannot keep operation, and this is and I think my research partners in Indonesia, they told me that the local people are aware of this situation, so they use this and to oppose when they're really unhappy with Julong's operation. So in this story, although we started wanting to know a China story, it's actually the China background is not really that important in reality. Yes, that's my response.
Thank you, Monica. Let's see whether there are perhaps 3 questions for. Hold on. Graham first. Right. Well,
okay.
Very generous, Graham.
Good, thank you. I just have 2 maybe short questions. One is to Alfian. Is that right? If I spell your name correctly, Alfian and Camilla. I think your paper is quite similar to Ewan Francisco, who wrote about the labor condition in Sihanouk in Cambodia. So I just want to ask you what your contribution to, do you want to contribute to additional field in what's in different part of countries or something else? The other thing, I really agree with Anita, like when I read the title, I think you may talk about, what I expect was that maybe you would talk about the, the 2 parts of the, workers, right? The local worker and the Chinese worker, whether they are getting along with each other or whether they have any cultural issue when they work together. That's what I expect from the title. Yeah, so another last question to Monica. When I read your title also, you seem to say it about the social and economic status in your case study. It seems like, and an environmental issue as well, right? It seems like you, I just want to raise an example, maybe you, from Cambodia context, like Anita said, in one of the projects in Cambodia, like land grabbing is the big issue, and then it's not an issue of land grabbing and make people landless, but it's also disrupting the indigenous community cultures and practice. Like they're no longer getting together very well. Like one group split to the company, support the company. The other group is fighting back for the, it's just, it's not common, but maybe consideration whether that project has any issue similarly to the case that I know in Cambodia. Thank you.
Yeah, a question for the same two people. Sorry, I feel like I'm missing you out in the middle because your paper was absolutely fascinating, but so fascinating I'm still getting my head around it. Camilla and Alfian, I hope you've had a chance to talk to Sean, because Sean's spent the last decade at a Chinese-run nickel mine in Papua New Guinea, and I was looking at your paper and just thinking, gosh, there's so many interesting similarities and differences. So you guys definitely need to have a chat at some stage. I also, many years ago, went looking for solidarity at a Chinese-run nickel mine, the same one that Sean did his fieldwork at. And we found it was a very fluid thing. And solidarity would often coalesce and disappear over very mundane, everyday things, such as food. So the sort of food offered in the canteens, such as safety, such as living conditions. And often the solidarity occurred because the target of the grievance for both the local workers and for the Chinese workers was the same. It was penny pinching middle management who weren't giving them what they wanted. So Chinese middle management. And often you would get these friendships developing around shared hatred of these middle managers who, often through no fault of their own, just through lack of resources, were simply not delivering on their promises and weren't providing gear to keep people's eyes from being, damaged, or even something as basic as boots on the ground. But have a talk to Sean, because the issue of solidarity is such an interesting one and very fluid. And then it would break down over the same things. So we had a massive dispute where I was called in to mediate. The question. No, it's just a recommendation that they look into Sean's work. Monica, all right, let me find a question in here somewhere. Have you looked at what's going on in PNG? There you go, there's a question. So there's a guy called Colin Filer who's done a lot of research into, I'd say, almost the same companies you're looking at in Indonesia. So companies like RH, ringing a bell probably. Again, very similar sort of issues in that land is really the key. And I hadn't really got across the Indonesia situation. In PNG, we sort of assume, because it's customary land, because it's traditional land, that's why it's a problem in PNG. So it's really interesting to find that in Indonesia, with very different land ownership system, you're describing almost identical problems. And the cat in the sack it's exactly what happens in PNG. It's like, who's the landowner? Are you the landowner? Who decides who the landowner is? And it's just simply unknown. So you get all kinds of conflicts around land. You get the World Bank and others coming in over the top and wanting to talk about the environment, and the locals are just going, no, that's not our concern at all. So a lot of similarities.
All right. Yeah, so very, very interesting presentations. I have similar questions for second and third presenters. So what's the role of law, if there's any role at all? I mean, for the labor issues, right? I think you cited Aaron's work. There's this there's exportation of Chinese labor to Saipan for building casinos. Saipan, the U.S. territory, and then I saw the same abuse of the rights, right? The boss took away their passports, excessive work hours, and the very poor conditions. And in the end, a U.S. lawyer, actually a friend of mine, intervened and started lawsuits. In the end, the Chinese companies had to compensate a few $1 million. So lawyers played a role. So what the question is, did lawyer play a role in your case? And in Monica's case, did the Chinese company, did Julong do due diligence, hire the lawyer to investigate the land rights complexity? That's what in the U.S. you must invest in a company like a field, right? A palm tree production. That's what you do. So I was wondering if there's a role for law and lawyers in your case.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. I'll start with Len. Okay, so why? What does this research contribute? We did read and also get some inspiration from Evan's piece on the comparison between the Chinese and Cambodian construction workers in Sihanoukville in Cambodia. We see this case study at this industrial park of nickel as a more complicated work site because it has more diversified ranks existing at the work site on both sides. So compared with the construction, just the the nickel mining and smelting is more more complicated, and also like speaking of the time, it's also a more sustained work site, which is not as temporary as the construction site. So we just think it's a good spot for us to look at, like maybe over several years, what can we see as the the barriers that's preventing the two groups of workers to come together, and also what could be the common ground. And we want to recognize that there isn't much information about the interaction of two groups of workers. So that's what we're missing, and that is also why I think Anita has her question about it doesn't see any solidarity. But I think we hope that this could be the very first step to see what are the what are things that are preventing solidarity, so that there could be some area that the activists can organize, and then in this in this process, certain forms of alliance or joint shared struggles can be fought. And what's the issue of the role that lawyers and law play in this problem. I think with the Saipan case, because Saipan is part of the U.S. territory, there is strong, enforcement against the forced labor and trafficking, and that's how, I guess Aaron Hello could fight for that case and have the win. But in Indonesia, the enforcement is weaker, to be frank, and we did see there are Indonesian human rights lawyers who also try to create this legal aid channels for the Chinese workers, and just at the beginning of this year, there is this law firm that presented three cases of Chinese migrant workers to the National Human Rights Commission, and say there are these problems that need to be tackled in a more systemic way. But it's I think it's it's a channel that's in the middle of creating, so it's not like something that's readily available. But it's because the Alfian can add more, but the law enforcement is really not so to the advantage of workers. Even local workers can face a lot of difficulties in using the law as a channel to address their grievances. So for migrant workers, law can be part of a ways to try out, but there also seem to be a lot of advocacy necessary for for this group of migrant workers.
So for Liang, for the indigenous communities, I don't feel that I know enough about this, but but on the ground we did interview the indigenous community people. It's Dayak group. It's but I think the situation is quite different from what maybe the general observation, because they have a strong feeling that they have power there and they can influence the company, and they have a strong sense of community there. But I'm not sure whether the story can be generalized. Maybe it's just a very special case, the place we did the research, so that will require a lot further research to really understand whether Indonesia is different or it's just a special case that we found. And in terms of title, I agree that I didn't really spend too much time on, it may not be a good title, and I will try harder next time. Sorry, I will answer that question first. In terms of law, and there is actually a very big literature. There are actually two frameworks. One is ASPO. It's can't remember the full name, but it's promoted by European Union, something sustainable, roundtable sustainable palm oil, but Indonesians don't like it, and they developed that ISPO, Indonesian sustainable palm oil, and it has some lower standards for something like environment and labor issues, and they make it easier for companies to comply. And in the case of Geelong, they comply with ISPO, and it's mandatory. ISPO is mandatory, and ASPO is not, and Geelong does not. Was once a member of ASPO, but they quit in 2017 or 18, I can't remember. But there is a big literature on ISPO and ASPO, the tension between them, why Indonesians don't want ASPO and some. But I'm not an expert on that governance issues, but there is a big discussion there. And in terms of land complexities, I think it's still related to that law itself. I think I remember someone once presented that the Indonesian land law, they still use some terms from the colonial era, and that makes it very complicated. And the company, they entered the site in 2011 or 12, but then during the interview, they said that they have given up on clearing, making an agreement on the land issues. They just do this on a case by case. Yes, just when there is opposition, they do something in response and give up really solving the problem. And Graham, I don't know that work. I have to study that. Yes, yes, I think, yes, there should be some similarities that I can learn from. Yeah, sorry.
Well, thank you. I was going to ask Liang whether you have any observations on land, law, or labor for that matter, based on your research.
I think it's a different topic, but in Ethiopia, I think the situation is just quite similar to Monica has described. And there's the kind of, what the Chinese doing in Ethiopia, they establish the industrial park, and they take land, not from the local people, but from the government. So the government is a claim, okay, this land belonging to nothing. But actually the inhabitants of the land, they are doing kind of pastoralism and agriculture. So they move from place to place, and like maybe 10 months later, they come back. Oh, the land is taken by the Chinese companies. And when they have the protest bring to the Chinese company, the Chinese company, it's not my business. I have a clean hand. It's the government. You just define the government. So, and this hatred just, and there's another issue related to the labor, because, this losing people, they cannot find jobs, so they find a job in the industrial parks. And I guess that maybe there's hatred accumulated and finally take the form of protest or looting or something like that, and it's related. Yeah. So that's the case in Ethiopia, but in Botswana it's different. Yeah.
Good, thank you for sharing that. There are a few minutes left for one or two other questions. One question. Thank you.
I have a question about the presentation on and the relation between Indonesian workers and Chinese worker in the manufacturing, I think. Chinese manufacturing in Indonesia. In Algeria, some Chinese workers adopt local habits and customs and integrate into the population by adopting the local language, culture, and even for some Chinese workers, the religion, thus avoiding certain tension with Algerian workers. Is this the case for Chinese workers in Indonesia? For some Chinese workers in Indonesia, yes.
Yeah, we hear from Indonesian and Chinese worker that Chinese workers, when they have to take a course of Indonesian language and little bit of culture, but not much, just in the surface, to give order or to only limit for learn Indonesian language and culture only for communicate in the workplace, not outside. But the company use this for advertising that, oh, we get along with Chinese and Indonesian workers, get along very well. They marry Indonesian worker, Indonesian community, Indonesian woman. They, like they want to show the image that Indonesian and Chinese workers are good enough in the workplace or in the outside.
And from your interviews, is there a better understanding on the two groups of workers?
It's a bit unique. If we interview workers from union, some they have sympathy to Chinese workers, but not much. They still have sentiment of anti-Chinese. But for local for Indonesian workers that have not joined union, they say they communicate along with Chinese worker. Even they say that, oh, Chinese worker give us money, renminbi, we take us present, or they give us food. The communication more open with workers that not join the union. Yeah, but also there's an interesting development right now. After, if you might heard that in January, the tension of Indonesian and Chinese workers in GNI, this second biggest, I think one of the biggest smelter, not our location, Indonesian and Chinese workers fighting, right? But after that, company set up a union and encourage Indonesian and Chinese union to join the union, and they can say that, oh, we have union. We even in outside smelter outside, Chinese worker cannot join the union. In us, we can have a union that Chinese worker can join, but not genuine union. They only rubber stamp what companies say.
Good, thank you very much. There is most likely much more that we can discuss, but we have reached the end of the day, at the end of the last session. I would like to hand back to Debbie and Greg to finalize the whole event.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for that, Pierre. It was great. So a couple of years ago, a few of us around ANU got together and we had this idea that we would have this global China research spoke, because we felt in Australia's conversation, it's all at the strategic and security level, and there wasn't enough sort of granular work of how China's export of capital, its expansion, is affecting people on the ground, societies and cultures and economies, and we wanted to research that in very granular ways. And the idea for a conference, I think it was actually your idea, Pierre, I must credit you for that, was that we should look at Chinese companies abroad.
That was my only contribution.
It was it was a gem. So it's very edifying, I think, for all of us to see that we've had this conference, and I think it's well and truly met the objectives and the vision of this research group. So yeah, a few thank yous. Obviously to thank China and the world, and Kevin Rudd, for his unintended consequences in having this building. It's been a nice place to meet. I want to thank Kian. I don't think she's here. She's gone. That's fine. All the chairs and discussants who were recruited, drafted at short notice. Leighton, thanks for all your work on handling the recording and the presentations. I think everyone would agree that we've had incredible diversity of topics, disciplines, viewpoints, and all of that's been really important. And most presentations I think we all could have listened to for 30, 40 minutes, I think. And 15 minutes is such a tough ask for any of us to try and compress our work. But I think in the end we got the right balance, because we really struggled, Debbie and I, we had 60 people wanting to come to this conference, and we had to make some really awful decisions about excluding some people, but I think we got the balance right for a 2-day conference. So all of that's really, really thanks to you all. So hopefully you're leaving here with some, having learnt a lot, having some new ideas that have germinated, and maybe even some research partnerships developing into the future. Last bit of advice, please don't get locked in this building. Last night 2 people got locked in and they rang us. And, I was already having a beer, and so I didn't even notice. Thankfully, that Debbie was on the ball. So, yeah, safe travels. As Anita said, enjoy Canberra if you can. We all hope that we'll keep in contact and have further fruitful partnerships. Thank you.